Buenas tardes, Barry. Muchísimas gracias por concederme un poquito de tu tiempo. Entiendo que tienes muchísimas cosas que hacer, por lo que te agradezco muchísimo este intervalo que me das. Tengo que empezar este vídeo haciendo una confesión de algo que me acaba de pasar hoy mismo. Esta mañana me encuentro con varios colegas en el trabajo y me invitan a comer. Y yo les digo que no puedo porque he quedado contigo para hacer un vídeo sobre el Marketplace. La reacción de los colegas es, no, el Marketplace no le hagas un vídeo a Barry Olsen sobre el Marketplace. Y es algo que me resulta sorprendente porque yo ya llevo más de 500 vídeos hechos y es la primera vez que alguien me diga que no hago un vídeo, cuando yo creo que lo importante es la información, ¿no te parece?
No, I completely agree. And first off, let me just start by saying, Lourdes, thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm looking forward to talking to you today. I'm looking forward to providing accurate information about what we are doing at KUDO. And really, it's just a pleasure. I think this is the third video that I have the privilege of doing with you.
Sí, tercero o cuarto, sí, ya hemos hecho unos cuantos, sí, señor, sí. Has estado conmigo desde el principio, eso es cierto, hay que reconocerlo. Empecemos por el principio, Barry. ¿Qué es KUDO? Una definición.
The most simple definition for KUDO is that KUDO is a language as a service platform. We offer software as a service that makes it possible to hold multilingual meetings online. Now, you'll notice in that definition, I did not say RSI or remote simultaneous interpretation. And there's a reason for that. We need to be able to offer this platform to end users who are focused on meeting a need. They need to meet, they need to communicate in multiple languages online. And so for them, that's what they care about. The interpreting community is focused on RSI, remote simultaneous interpretation. And that's one element of a successful multilingual meeting online on a software as a service platform. So that's how I would describe it. And the focus is really on multilingual communication above all. And that includes both the end users, the participants in the meeting, and the professional simultaneous interpreters that provide the service on the platform.
Dime una cosa, apostar por todas estas tecnologías cuando llega la pandemia, sin duda, es un acierto, porque ustedes ya estaban preparados para hacer frente a una nueva realidad, ¿no? Me gustaría saber, si es posible, un poco cómo ha afectado eso a KUDO, cómo ha crecido el número de reuniones que hace, la base de datos que tiene, de intérpretes, los idiomas que cubren, el tipo de reuniones que celebran, un poco qué ha pasado desde que estalla la pandemia en marzo del año pasado.
So, great question. I mean, the simple answer is that because of the pandemic, our traffic and our business has exploded. Now, that also means that that's been a good thing for interpreters that are working on the platform, because it means that they have had opportunities to continue to offer their services. Now, who's on the platform? Private institutions, private companies, government institutions, international organizations. It really does run the gamut. And they are holding meetings to meet the needs that they have to maintain business continuity during a difficult time, right? During this pandemic. And as you can imagine, KUDO before the pandemic was a different company than it is now. Because after the pandemic hit, there was a wave of interest in multilingual meetings online. And that is something that in the past, organizations knew you could do it, but they really didn't have a reason to. And so the pandemic was really the push that got the wagon moving. And not just for KUDO, but for many online meeting platforms, mono and multilingual. And it has shown that this is a viable way of getting business done. Now, it's not going to replace the way we did business previously in every situation. And I think sometimes, as I've spoken with colleagues in different places, their concern often is one of, oh no, this is going to completely change absolutely everything the way we've done it in the past. And that's really not the case. What it's going to do is it's going to expand access to our services, and we've seen that happen. There's been a lot of replacement during the pandemic, and thank goodness, because without that replacement, we wouldn't be working at all, right? And so we have to realize that this is here to stay, but as the pandemic wanes, things are going to change a little bit. Let me quickly answer the other question that you had in terms of languages that we cover, how many interpreters work with us. Those that have gone through the KUDO certification process, and I know by saying that, many people are already going to get their hackles up. I'll talk about that a little bit later if you ask me some questions about it. But those who have gone through the initial software certification process to know how to use the platform successfully has gone from under 2,000 before the pandemic to almost 11,000 today around the world. And we have more than, I think it's safe to say, more than 80 different language combinations that we provide on the platform today.
¿Número de reuniones que celebráis?
The number of meetings that took place last year, I wasn't able to do my homework right before this, but I would say that it's in the hundreds of thousands.
Okay. Vale, esto me lleva por tu propia terminología a preguntarte sobre algo que a mí me interesa muchísimo y es la comunicación de KUDO, que creo que ha hecho un trabajo brillante. Me he estudiado la página web entera antes de hacer esta entrevista y hay dos cosas por las que te quería preguntar. Primero, la identidad corporativa. He visto que se usa mucho el amarillo, que es un color que está relacionado con el dinamismo, con la flexibilidad, pero también con la felicidad. Imagino que esa ha sido una opción consciente, ¿no? Eso por una parte. Quería que me lo confirmaras si eso es así y si tú consideras que esos son los valores de la empresa. Y por otra parte, el lenguaje, la terminología. En muchos casos me resulta muy abstracto, muy ambiguo e incluso llega a ser confuso. Me refiero a cuando hablan de el training como la formación, la certificación, esos badges o acreditaciones. Todo eso resulta muy ambiguo con un cierto toque académico que puede resultar confuso para el cliente. ¿Me lo explicas?
Happy to do so. Let me start first with our logo and color choices and all of those things. It should be said that this was decided long before I actually joined KUDO. So I checked with our founders and talked to them about this. So I think the first thing is that the word KUDO actually is Albanian, and it means anywhere or everywhere. And so that was a very specific choice because there is meaning in the name KUDO. Additionally, KUDO is something that anyone can pronounce in any language, and they can easily look at the letters and know how it's pronounced. And that matters, right? The other thing is, if you look at the logo, yes, we do have a lot of very dynamic colors. There's a lot of movement in it, as you can see. And the logo actually represents the seamless integration of multiple languages, multiple cultures, and worldviews. And the colors actually change as the elements intersect. If you look at the letters, they touch each other. And the purpose in that, the symbolism, if you will, is that it indicates the creative richness of diversity. And that's what we're doing. We're bringing together diverse elements, linguistic, cultural, different ideas, so that you can see that richness come together and the results can really be magic. So that's the idea behind the KUDO logo. Now, when we get to the whole idea behind certification and badges, let me try to just walk this back a little bit. Again, many colleagues initially saw the KUDO certification or KUDO certified interpreter as something akin to an interpreter certification of their knowledge, their skills, and their abilities. Now, to explain what this certification is, forget the word interpreter, just remove it. Say KUDO certified. All that this badge does is indicate that you are proficient in the use of the software platform called KUDO. Now, this is a new concept for our profession. because when we hear certification, we think of something different. We think, oh, I've been certified by this organization. I'm on their roster. They hire me because I've passed some very rigorous exams, and they know that my language and my knowledge are both up to snuff to be able to work on their teams. And that's the concept of certification that exists within our profession. Within the software as a service field, which has exploded over the last decade, I would imagine that just about everybody listening to this video is using software as a service on a regular basis, but they just don't realize it. And in this software as a service realm, there are what they call micro certifications. And if you go to some of the different badge or certification platforms, the one we use is called Acclaim, or Credly, actually. Acclaim is the badge setup, but the company is called Credly. They offer thousands of different badges that are created by software as a service companies for people who want to show very quickly on social media like LinkedIn and other platforms that people have the know-how to work with software. And so there are all sorts of badges, and a lot of people actually at the bottom of their email signatures will include these badges that say, I have this certification, this certification, this certification. And they collect them because it's a quick way to indicate, I know how to use this software, right? So that's what the KUDO certified badge means. Now, granted, and one of the first things that I've learned as in a company is that, you know what, sometimes we have missteps, we make mistakes. We could have done a better job of rolling out how this was done.
Yes.
Right? We really, really could have. But we're working in a space where everything is growing very quickly. There's a lot of demand on our time. And, you know, looking back on this, we would have rolled it out completely differently.
Se podía haber hecho de otra manera y evitar ese tipo de confusión que la gente puede entender pues hecha con mala fe, ¿no? Y eso es lo que un poco no hacía falta, ¿no? Buscar mejor esa terminología, ¿no? Para evitar la confusión, yo creo, vaya, ¿sabes?
Exactly, but it's also an issue, Lourdes, of two different concepts coming together.
Sí,
you have the interpreting market, you have the interpreting profession, and then you have the software as a service milieu or market where people have to get these badges, and it's the most normal thing in the world. And so when the two came together, it was as though, you know, what's going on, and it caused a lot of concern.
Pero al plantear esa fusión, desde el punto de la óptica del intérprete, yo creo que se tenía que haber sido más cuidadoso con la terminología, ¿no? Pero bueno, ya estamos aquí, ¿no?
And it's an interesting thing that you bring up, you know, because with that terminology, and of course, when you're working with translators and interpreters, terminology and words really matter. Some of the phrases that were mentioned as problematic by people online and in social media, actually we had absolutely no control over. We tried to, but when Credly, you know, when they issued the badges, when we moved from having our own badge to actually having a verified badge on a platform, the email signature at the bottom of those emails that went out automatically to all of the people who had done the certification, you know, it said, show everyone your badge, your great accomplishment, you have done this. And we got in contact with them and we said, we really need to adjust that language. And they said, sorry, we can't. And that was the end of it. We couldn't do anything else. And so at that point, we just had to say, you know, it is what it is. It's those two worlds colliding, if you will. And we want to make that fusion a little bit smoother in the future.
Sí, exacto. Bueno, pero también está muy bien aprender de los errores. Ya sabes qué tipo de sensibilidades, problemas que todo esto puede plantear. Descríbeme o defíneme qué es un KUDO Certified Interpreter y qué es un Kudo Pro Interpreter. Las dos cosas.
So the KUDO Certified Interpreters, and again, you know what KUDO certified means. It doesn't attest to anybody's interpreting ability. Okay, these are conference interpreters who have completed KUDO's online tutorial and have attended a practice webinar on the platform where they've been able to get in and sandbox is the term that gets used, test things out, learn how to take relay, learn how to listen to the floor mix, learn how to hand over the microphone to their virtual booth mate, right? These interpreters meet KUDO's minimum hardware standards and connectivity requirements, the minimum ones. And they are able to interpret on KUDO with, limited supervision. And their experience, and this is the important part, their experience and compliance are self-declared and we do not vet them, all right?
Pero es que eso es un problema, ¿no?
Well, and we've worked to address that as well. Again, if you look at it from an interpreter's point of view in the world we've always worked in, then you're like, oh, well, no, that's a problem. But if you look at it from the software as a service point of view, they're like, well, yeah, that makes total sense because this is them working through saying that they have done these two things to make sure that they know how to use the software. I should also say that we have a KUDO certified process for our operators and the technicians that are on the meetings as well. Right? And it's virtually the same thing. They actually learn how all of the interpreter software works so that they're able to troubleshoot and support interpreters, right? And so that certification is pretty much the same for both, right? We're not certifying people's ability to interpret. And that's a hard thing for interpreters to wrap their mind around because we're so used to seeing certification as associated with our abilities, knowledge, and skills.
Claro, porque vuelve a ser el mismo problema de terminología. Mi madre puede hacer ese curso y se puede certificar. Por poder hacerlo sí que puede, aunque no tenga ni idea, ¿no? Es decir, que ahí yo creo que hay problemas básicamente de eso, de cómo ya se llaman las cosas. Pero bueno, sí.
Yeah, so I mean, that's where I would say just eliminate the interpreters, and KUDO certified means that you know how to use the software. Sí. Now, when you come over to the software as a service world, you're going to see that people have all sorts of certifications again, and it doesn't have to do with their ability to speak a language. It has everything to do with their familiarity with software. So how did we work to address that? We've introduced a second badge called KUDO Pro. Okay, and this is Kudo Pro Interpreters. And this is where we do vet and very closely. So professional conference interpreters can be KUDO Pro Interpreters, but they have proven experience in remote simultaneous interpreting in general, and they have experience in KUDO in particular. They have mastered the skills that they need to interpret on a meeting held on KUDO, and they can do so independently and on short notice. The people that earn the KUDO Pro badge, they meet or exceed our connectivity and technical requirements. And we really rigorously do test this. KUDO Pro interpreters have been vetted for quality and for experience, quality and experience of their interpreting ability. And also we vet their compliance with our standards. And we do this on a regular basis. In fact, once you are granted a KUDO Pro badge, you will have to re-up every year, or you will have to re-certify, if you will, to make sure that your technology is where it needs to be, that you have been working, that you have had a certain number of assignments on the platform. And this is super, super important because these are interpreters that are going to be able to work in the marketplace with a shorter lead time to meetings. And I know we're going to get to that too, because that's something that has created a lot of concern as well.
Pero dime una cosa, entonces de esas dos categorías, aquí la que realmente se puede considerar interpretación o intérpretes es la segunda, los pros. La anterior, la primera, realmente no te sirve para nada.
No, I wouldn't say that they're not good for anything. That is not appropriate. And let me explain why.
Sí, por favor.
We have a lot of professional conference interpreters with the KUDO Pro certification because their clients that hire them directly and hold meetings on KUDO want to make sure that they are proficient with the platform and the software and that they understand how to work on the platform. Okay?
Vale, pero entonces tienes esta primera certificación simplemente para validar a esos intérpretes profesionales que pueden trabajar y conocen la plataforma, pero tienes que tener a muchos más intérpretes que simplemente sean KUDO Certified, que no llegan a la segunda categoría. ¿Qué pasa con ellos? ¿Qué hacen esos intérpretes?
Again, those interpreters, you don't have to become a Kudo Pro interpreter. That is entirely opt-in, and it's a decision that every interpreter can apply for, and you have to go through the rigorous process. But we have many, many clients that hire their own interpreters. In fact, roughly 85% of our clients hire their own interpreters. Only 15% use interpreters that Kudo has in the database.
Vale.
And here again, this is something that interpreters can use to be able to market their services to people who are holding meetings on Kudo, right? Because they come and they say, we need to have some. Well, okay, someone could come to you. Well, let me explain it this way. A client decides to hold meetings on Kudo. They want to have interpreters. And they have interpreters that they've been using in the past for different reasons, right? In different parts of the world. They go to these interpreters and say, have you ever worked on Kudo? In that case, they can say, actually, yes, I've gone through the certification process. I'm familiar with software. That is a very quick way for a client to know that, okay, someone I've worked with also has the technical knowledge. Again, you have to understand what the purpose of the badge is.
Claro. Vale.
And that's a hard thing for us to wrap our head around because we're so used to thinking the certification has to do with our interpreting skills, right? Now, try to call it something else. You know, we worked through that, but you go over to the software as a service side and they're all called certifications.
Yeah.
And so we're in this two different worldviews that we're bridging as we're trying to work through this creation of a new kind of source of work for interpreters, right? Does that make sense?
Sí. Dime una cosa, ¿cuántos intérpretes tienes en la base de datos? Pro y no pro. En total, ¿de cuánta gente estamos hablando? Para entender la magnitud.
Okay, so magnitude-wise, think about this. We're right around 11,000 that have done the certification.
Sí.
Now, that includes professional interpreters. It also includes operators that have gone through it. And so that number is not just interpreters, but the vast majority, well over 90% are interpreters that have done this Kudo certification, okay, with many different language combinations. Now, within that group, you have lots of professional interpreters. And I want to say something that I've listened to a number of people talk about online interpreting. And, as interpreters, we think our world is often the world, right?
Yes.
And so anything outside of what we do, well, that's not conference interpreting, right? What the pandemic and what the technologies have done is they've brought down those garden walls around the different interpreting worlds. And some of the reactions from colleagues have been, I'm a professional interpreter. Those over there aren't. As I say, because we do things a certain way, and then these other interpreters also are very professional, but they're working in different situations. And our profession needs to come to terms with that, right? Putting an adjective in front of interpreting and making that somehow that makes us different, I don't know that that's necessarily a good thing for our profession. We need to really understand as a whole what's going on. And if anything, this certification process that we have done for the software has shown that there are a lot of interpreters out there that are working and were working before the pandemic and that we're providing professional services. And so I think it's important for us to not be dismissive. That's not Kudo speaking, that's Barry, conference interpreter trainer, saying that. It's so important for us to come together and recognize that there is professional work being done in all sorts of ways and in all sorts of places. And just because it may not conform exactly to what our concept of what professional interpreting is, we shouldn't dismiss it.
Yeah. Volvamos otra vez a la cuestión de la estrategia.
Sorry, I got off on a tangent.
La estrategia de comunicación, que me ha parecido, ya te dije antes, fantástica. De repente la red se llena de esas acreditaciones, como esta, de colores, y de repente son los intérpretes los que hacen la campaña de comunicación a KUDO, que es fantástico. Y eso crea dos tipos de cosas. La gente que está muy orgullosa de pertenecer a KUDO y que muestra su badge con muchísimo orgullo, pero luego surge también, como un poco lo que has dicho tú, el movimiento contrario de gente, profesionales que piensan que ustedes se están aprovechando de esa gente para promocionar la plataforma. ¿A ti eso qué te sugiere?
Well, I would simply say that was not the intent whatsoever. You know, interpreters have a reason to show the badge. I display the badge proudly on my LinkedIn profile because it indicates that I am proficient in that software and that I can work on that platform. I would anticipate that in the future, we're going to see more of these kinds of micro certifications, as they're called in the software as a service space, because there are many platforms out there. How are you going to let a potential client know, particularly as people are now searching online on LinkedIn? I mean, one of my former students yesterday, she tweeted out, she said, I just got a job off of Instagram. Never would have thought it. But there it is.
Es así.
So, and this is totally different. Now, this isn't going to replace the way the UN hires interpreters or the EU. It's not. But it is creating a new space.
Algo nuevo, distinto.
Exactly. And so if that's the way that more work is going to come to us, we need to have a way to show that we can work with different platforms, different tools, and that we are there to do it so they can hire us and they can already know, okay, these guys work with KUDO, great. They've got this certification, they've got the KUDO Pro badge, even better, we're good to go. That's the thing behind it. And as I mentioned before, right, that email that went out was a form email from Credly, and we couldn't change the email signature, even though we tried.
Bueno, Barry, tú haces formación como yo a mis alumnos siempre les he dicho que la única forma de competir en el mercado es la calidad. A mí en KUDO me preocupa cómo se controla esa calidad y sobre todo también me preocupa cómo se verifican las credenciales que dicen tener muchos intérpretes. ¿Sabes? Hay algo que me resulta muy vago y que yo creo que la calidad es fundamental para que esta profesión pueda sobrevivir. No me queda muy claro si realmente KUDO es riguroso con eso o no. Eso es lo que me preocupa.
So the short answer is yes, we are very rigorous, especially at the KUDO Pro badge level. In fact, what I'll do, Lourdes, is I'll send you a link to the application for the KUDO Pro badge, and you can go through it for you to be able to see just how rigorous it is.
Muy bien.
We have
Pero
a team of... Yes.
Luego compruebas que eso es cierto, porque en español se dice lo de el papel lo aguanta todo, es decir, por escrito todo vale. ¿Cómo se puede comprobar que todo eso realmente es cierto? ¿Sabes?
Well, you have to go in, you have to check and see if people have the credentials that they say they do. One of the things that we check for is professional association membership.
Vale.
Right? That professional association membership has great value, does it not?
Sí.
Right? And so being able to have that, so to be KUDO certified, you have to have a minimum of 10 meetings as an interpreter on KUDO, right? And so we have quality control in those meetings to be able to know how things are going. You need to have a minimum of at least 500 hours or 100 days of verifiable interpreting experience.
Vale.
And if you have an advanced degree in language interpretation, that can potentially waive the 500-hour minimum or the 100 days minimum requirement. And the reason for this is that there are some very talented young interpreters that have not hit that 100 days yet. And if they have that advanced degree and they have the stuff to be able to work successfully, then we don't want to hold them back from that, right? And so that's something that we are willing to waive if all of the other elements are in place and they have an advanced degree in conference interpreting. Okay? They also have to be in full compliance with our connectivity and technical requirements.
Sí, vale.
Okay? That as well, because that's also quality. You know, when you bring up quality, Lourdes, quality it's one of those nebulous terms that nobody really wants to define clearly, because that would mean that, well, then we would have a specific definition, and quality gets bandied around all the time without a clear definition. It's like saying, democracy. What's democracy? There are so many definitions out there about it. But people know what quality is when they hear it, right?
Exacto.
Interpreters listen, they know quality.
Sí, que
I
eso
know
es
quality
cierto.
sound when I hear it. Just like the client. The client knows quality, but they know
¿Estás
it in a different
seguro
way.
que el
Damn it, like,
cliente...
was my meeting successful? Right?
Claro, pero ahí
That's how
volvemos
the
a entrar
image-
en lo mismo, el éxito de una reunión. ¿Tú crees que un cliente es quien realmente tiene que juzgar la interpretación? Porque al cliente también se le puede dar muchas vueltas. Puede sonar muy bien, pero no puede ser, no
Yeah.
tiene por qué ser riguroso. Es decir, que ahí también, si todo depende del criterio del cliente, ya la cosa puede chirrear también un poco, ¿no?
Well, yeah, if everything, as you said, if everything depends on the
parte,
client,
ok.
right? There are many voices in this whole process, and the
Vale.
client voice is definitely one of them.
Sí.
And
sí,
we
sí.
need to give heed to it. But you also have to have spot checks. You need to see how people are doing, how is their interpreting going, and keeping up on all of that. And at the same time, also making sure that you equip the interpreters with the tools they need to do a quality job, right? So they need to have documents. They need to have time to prepare. And I know that that's another concern that's come up. It's like, how can you do this at the last minute and expect us to be able to
Exacto.
jump from meeting to meeting?
Ya viene, esa pregunta también la tengo.
So, at any rate, quality is an important thing, and we are measuring it in different ways. The client voice matters. Interpreters' voices matter. We also have a department that is actually staffed with professional conference interpreters that work full-time for KUDO, and they are making sure they are on these onboarding webinars, right, where people come and practice. They listen, they're paying attention. And I would add another element to quality that is really important. It's not just what comes out of your mouth, it's also what people hear, right? That's something that Bill Wood said, a long time ago. He said, it's not what comes out of your mouth, it's what goes into the listener's ear. And so there are other elements of quality. How's the bandwidth? How is the connectivity? Is the microphone that's being used good? Is the input coming to the interpreter quality, or was it bad at the outset? And so can you really hold the interpreter responsible, right? One thing to make really clear is that KUDO would not exist without two important groups: clients and professional conference interpreters. So it is not in our interest at all to do anything that would undermine professional conference interpreting. I know that many people may find that hard to believe because of what they've been saying to each other and what's been circulating out there. But the reality is, it is not in our interest whatsoever to undermine the profession, right? Now, the profession has to shift, and a lot of people have different ideas about how things should be done. And we definitely have differences regarding that. But if anybody's talking about, doing what's best for the profession, there are different ideas about that. And I can assure you that my motivation and KUDO's motivation is to make sure that we keep a healthy profession and a healthy market. Because without that, we can't continue to function.
Claro, porque hay que mantener el mercado, tiene que ser una profesión y unas formas de trabajar sostenibles en el tiempo, ¿vale? Creo que estamos viviendo una pandemia, pero la remota está para quedarse, eso está clarísimo, como dices tú también. Pero hay que intentar hacerlo de una forma saludable que respete la profesión, un trabajo bien hecho, de calidad, con unas normas de seguridad, técnicas, etcétera, que funcionen y que permita que la profesión viva, ¿no? Dime una cosa, porque te acabas de volver a salir por la tangente. Entre todos esos intérpretes pro, hay diferentes lenguas, más o menos experiencia. Hay muchos intérpretes diferentes. ¿Hay tarifas diferentes? ¿Se cobra lo mismo siempre? ¿Cómo va el tema? O igual no me quieres contestar, o no se puede saber.
No, I can refer to some of this. I mean, I don't want to talk about what we pay or what's charged or anything like that for obvious reasons. Just as no individual interpreter is going to go out and start shouting to the four winds, this is how much I charge this client, and this is how much I am being paid by that client. That's just not good business practice. And I think everyone recognizes that. But I can tell you that we looked at this very carefully. And the idea of differentiated rates, especially in a pandemic where you have a lot of people who are out of work, that is not where you want to go, because that can create a race to the bottom. And so specifically on our marketplace, we ensure that all interpreters are paid the same, right? They have access to the same rate. Now, or the same fees, right? The professional fees that they're going to be paid. This is because we recognize that there is a shift that's happening, right? It's not something that KUDO started, right? This is a huge process that started decades ago, and it's globalization. For many years, we benefited from globalization, right? And we were able to get on planes and fly all over the place to offer our services because of globalization. While translators were seeing their work be digitized and moved completely online. The idea of sending a translator to a meeting venue disappeared, right? Now,
eso supone la precarización que ha vivido la traducción por la globalización.
Yeah.
Si esa tendencia se mantiene ahora y se pasa a la interpretación, nosotros acabaríamos también igual, ¿o no?
Well, it's a trend that we can't stop it. And we have to be honest with ourselves about that. We have to figure out, how do we adapt as a profession so that we can successfully weather this radical change and still come out with a good, healthy profession on the other end. And again, this is where opinions and ideas differ significantly. And I recognize that. But in terms of motivation, I believe very firmly that what we are doing is for the benefit of the profession in the short, medium, and long terms, right? So what we are going to see happen is, as the pandemic wanes, we're going to see a lot more hybrid meetings. We're already seeing them. Organizations that need interpreting services are going to ask themselves some very difficult questions, right? Hard questions. When do we need to have an interpreter physically present? And there are going to be meetings where that has to happen. It just has to happen. But there are going to be other meetings where they're going to say, well, probably not. And there will be some replacement. But on the same, in that same vein, you will also see more and more meetings. And this is where Marketplace comes into play. More and more meetings that didn't exist before because the technology and the availability of the talent was not there, or it was so onerous to put into place that it just didn't make sense to try and offer professional interpreting services for these types of meetings. And that's shifting, and we're seeing more opportunity as well. It's different opportunity, but it is new opportunity. And I think we make a mistake as a profession to think that we can apply practices that were developed in the 60s to a market in the 21st century in 2021. Now, there are some things that need to remain, right? But there are many things where I would say, we need to be a little bit more flexible, and we need to recognize that we need to adapt to the new reality, just as meeting participants have had to adapt to the new reality, right? There are going to be non-negotiables, but there are a lot of things that we need to ask ourselves, okay, what is it that we are going to be able to have give and take so that we can actually adapt and remain relevant and continue to add value to the international global conversation?
Ya hemos empezado a hablar de esto, así que cojo el tema y seguimos por el Marketplace. Pasamos de la plataforma al Marketplace. ¿En qué momento surge la idea del Marketplace? ¿Era algo que estaba ya previsto desde un principio cuando se crea la plataforma KUDO, o ha sido un desarrollo posterior? Me interesa saber la estrategia, de dónde parte todo y a dónde va, ¿no?
Okay. Well, I would just simply say this. We didn't come up with the idea of the marketplace.
¿No?
We reacted to the need in the market.
Vale, es decir, que no era algo que se planteaba en un principio. Se hizo una plataforma que fue creciendo, donde los clientes empezaron a pedir cosas y sobre eso se crea el marketplace, ¿correcto?
That is correct.
Vale.
Now, you look at all sorts of things, and obviously you can see what's happening with software, you can see what's happening with markets, and you could say, oh, wouldn't it be nice if, or oh, what if we created that? And maybe, people can have things in their head. But this was a direct response to a market need.
Esto es interesante, porque yo pensé que todo era un proceso ideado con un calendario fijo. Ahora lanzamos una plataforma, creamos una bolsa grandísima de intérpretes y con esos intérpretes empezamos a hacer un mercado de servicio más que la propia tecnología. No, ha venido después. No, me interesa muchísimo porque era una pregunta que tenía. Digo, ¿esto es un proceso?
You're making me think of, you're familiar with El Chapulín Colorado, ¿verdad?
No.
Okay, he's a very well-known comic character in Latin America. And he would also, often used to say, tengo todo fríamente calculado.
Exacto, pues no era así, ¿no?
But I have everything carefully planned out from the very beginning, right? But that's, yes, there were plans to do things, but to think that somehow we had this as a grand design from the very beginning, not necessarily.
Vale.
It really is a response to what the needs are in the market, right? And those needs changed radically after the pandemic started, and they are going to transition significantly after the pandemic to hybrid meetings. There will still be fully distributed online meetings, but it's a new and a very dynamic time. So our clients knew that they needed the right interpreters, and they want to get them as easily as possible, right? With as little friction as possible. They didn't want to go offline to do it, right? They're setting up a meeting in a platform, and then it's like, oh, well, now we got to find the interpreters. Okay, so someone needs to call this person and call that person. You know the typical process that's out there.
Sí.
And they don't want to go offline. So Marketplace is our suggested solution to the problems that the clients have. That's really what it is. And again, I think it's important to make clear that Marketplace is not something that any person in the world can just log on to and suddenly get an interpreter. At least not at this stage. Maybe it'll grow to that. Who knows? But we have created a system for our existing subscription clients that like to use interpreters and don't have access to them through their own networks. And so they are able to, in just a few clicks, identify people that can work on their meeting.
Si tuvieras que definir el marketplace en dos frases, ¿cómo lo definirías?
Okay. Well, I would say in its current iteration, it is a scheduling device to automate the booking of interpreters with as few clicks as possible by clients, and to provide interpreters with opportunities that match their availability, language combination, subject matter expertise, and interest.
Qué bien te ha sonado todo eso, ¿eh?
Okay. Well, there you go.
El eje de todo es el cliente, entonces.
I wouldn't say that necessarily. No. It is one of the important poles, right?
Vale.
As I've said before, we have two very important clienteles, if you will. The interpreters that provide the service,
sí,
and the clients who need the service, right? And on the platform, those two things come together, all right? It was designed thinking of the client and the interpreter. You really can't disassociate one group from the other. There is no Kudo without interpreters and clients. So we just have to keep those things in mind. And we see this as a great opportunity for interpreters. And let me just explain some of the reasons why. KUDO Marketplace is entirely opt-in. If someone does not wish to participate, they don't have to. It covers a certain type of meeting, shorter meetings. The average online meeting goes for about 2 hours. Okay. Sometimes they're shorter. Sometimes they're a little longer. And interpreters can use this and indicate when they are available, right? They have a 3-4 day job with this client, then they have another 2-day job with this client next week. They got a couple days in between. They'd be happy to work if they have the availability. They go in on their profile as a Kudo Pro interpreter who has opted into Marketplace, and they would then click and say, okay, I'm going to mark when my availability is, and that's all they have to do. And they would then receive, if there is a job that they have been selected for, and it could be, we always love to go to the extremes and say, okay, let's start with the extreme. Oh, 2 hours. That's the minimum, right? You have to have at least 2 hours in advance.
Pero es poco 2 horas.
It could be up to 48. It could be 2 days in advance, right? So when an interpreter receives an indication, it could be by SMS, it could be through an in-app notification or email. They click, go in, they see what is being offered, they can see if there are any documents that have been uploaded, they can see the topic, they can see who the client is, and they know everything, and with one click, they can decline or accept.
Si dicen que no, ¿qué pasa? Nada. No hay un registro de gente complicada, intérpretes exigentes, que no, eso no se registra, el algoritmo no lo registra.
Why would turning down a job that you're not appropriate for just the simple fact that you don't have time because your schedule has changed? Why would that be a negative against you?
Bueno, porque si tú a un cliente le rechazas muchos trabajos seguidos, llega un momento que no te llama más. Eso...
Oh, well, that's true. I mean, but what's different about that in Marketplace and in the real world?
No, pregunto cómo funciona. Digo,
yeah.
Sí.
I mean, with that, I think we're mirroring fairly well. In the algorithm, there is one of the final things is how many times has a job with this kind of parameters been rejected by the interpreter. Exactly. And in that case, it will then not, it will factor that into the calculation of who gets selected for a job. So, but we can get to that if you want to know more. I can talk about the algorithm.
El algoritmo todavía no. Espera. Lo de el cliente siempre tiene la razón. Si hay una queja, ¿qué se hace? ¿La responsabilidad se investiga? ¿Se da siempre la razón al cliente? ¿O se defiende al intérprete? ¿Qué pasa ahí?
Yes. It is investigated. We find out what was going on. As you can imagine, the usual suspects for any kind of problem is, okay, was the speaker wearing a headset? How was their connectivity? Exactly. And we have the ability to go in on the back end and we can look into those things to see if a given connection had particular problems, right? And so we are able to determine if there were problems. And I will tell you that the language service team in KUDO goes to bat for interpreters. They really, really do. Because we understand that right now, this is a difficult thing. We're adapting to new conditions and there are problems that come up, right? And so that needs to be recognized. And we recognize that an interpreter's reputation is important.
It is.
And so here again, it's not, oh, the client complains, so you're done. But I want to just highlight again that this whole issue of the client complains and the client is always right, that concept, well, it existed before remote interpreting. So bringing that out and mentioning it, I would just say, I think that that's really not a valid argument if you're trying to say why you don't like working virtually, right? It's something that's always existed.
Otra crítica. Se habla de que el marketplace va a ser la cosificación del intérprete, que va a ser un poco como la tecnología. Un gadget más que uno necesita para dar un servicio sin prestar mucha atención a las necesidades de los intérpretes. ¿Qué tienes que decir, Barry, al respecto?
No.
No?
How's that? It's a scheduling tool. Like I said, it benefits both the clients and the interpreters who offer their services on the platform. Mm-hmm. It's a new way of doing it. Is it different? Does it mean that you're not going to be receiving phone calls? Yes. You won't be receiving phone calls to accept an assignment. I mean, I saw this happen with a number of my clients early on, say maybe 15 years ago, when one particular institutional client said, we will no longer make phone calls to confirm assignments. You will receive a confirmation via email. It caused all sorts of heartburn among many of the interpreters. What? You don't have the decency to give me a call? How is this? It was the same argument, right? And now, I do understand it's nice to have a personal connection with people. Totally agree. But this market segment is very fast moving, and being able to confirm something to move forward successfully with an event or a meeting is really important, right? And so in this segment of the market, being able to get that very quickly is great. And I don't think it is really now you're going to put me on the spot, la cosificación, of turning people into things.
Exacto.
or a commodification, I think is what you were getting at, right? Interpreting is not a commodity. It does require special expertise. It does require preparation. It does require certain conditions, right? And we're working to meet those. But saying it is akin to commodification because you're trying to eliminate friction in the process of retaining interpreting talent, that doesn't ring true to me. Because that's kind of like the same thing with many of the services that we use as individuals. We need to ask ourselves, how do we feel if we say, oh no, you're going to have to wait 48 hours because we need to see if they're available, and they'll get back to us, and I should be able to confirm this by the end of the week. And what you need to know is, okay, can this be taken care of? And I need to know within the next 24 hours, right? We are seeing the lead times just getting smaller and smaller. It's not something we've created. It's something we've noticed, and we're trying to respond to it in a positive way, because just crossing arms and saying, no, we don't do that, is probably one of the fastest ways to find yourself, as just becoming anachronistic and losing importance or being relevancy in this new developing market.
Barry, hablas mucho de la rapidez, la flexibilidad, la disponibilidad, conseguir equipos 24 horas al día, los 7 días de la semana. ¿Cómo funciona el algoritmo de KUDO? ¿Cómo hace eso el algoritmo? ¿Cómo selecciona los intérpretes? ¿Puedes explicarnos un poquito?
I can explain some. I don't want to get into too much detail because you can imagine this is, as they like to say in the technology space, it's our secret sauce.
Yes,
you know
I
what
know.
I mean? But I can tell you that the sorting is done against a number of criteria, such as meeting duration, right? Because if you have a duration meeting that's going to go 3 hours, you need to keep track of people's schedules and what their availability is. This is a really complex thing. Then you have to look at language combination, obviously. You need to know who has said that they are available. You have to take into account availability of interpreters as indicated on their calendar. You have to take into account subject matter expertise. And we do this on 2 levels. Subject matter expertise in general, right? Things that if you have a day to prepare and you've got some documents, you could go in and do a good job in this meeting. And then there's like a second level of expertise, stuff that we've done so many times we could probably do it in our sleep, right? Where we know the topics very, very well. We know the space and what's going on. And again, this is nothing new. Getting pulled in at the last minute, ask any diplomatic interpreter how much lead time they get on some of the assignments they have, right? So again, this isn't an innovation. We didn't invent doing things at last minute. And so that second level of subject matter expertise, we take into account so that if there's a really short lead time, then we're going to know which interpreters have indicated that those are topics that they know well and feel like they could come in and do. We also take into account previous exposure to the requesting client, right? How many times have you already worked for client X? And because clients like to have dependability and they like predictability just like everybody else, right? And so we're trying to make sure we can combine that to where there are teams of interpreters that are going to be selected for certain clients because they've been very successful with them and done many meetings. We also look at their experience on KUDO. How much have they worked? How familiar are they, right? Just to really know, because we need to know that when someone says they're taking something, they're going to be there, their technology works, right? And let me just mention in terms of responsibility, the interpreter's responsibility is to make sure they've got the right computer, that they have a good internet connection and a headset, and that's it, right? If there are problems that happen, we've covered that in our contracts, right? The liability ends there. So the liability issue can be addressed, and it has been. We also look at the time zone of the meeting relative to your location. So an interpreter isn't getting, exclusively opportunities to work at 3 a.m., right? You want to try and have that be smoothed out so that you're going to be working during regular business hours as much as possible, right? And then we do have a couple where we're saying, okay, if the client has expressed a concern about an interpreter in the past, we've investigated, it's valid, all right, we know it's just best not to match them up. That's something that can be taken into account, but I will tell you it's not one of the main weighting things, right? And then obviously if an interpreter has declined, multiple times a certain subject matter, well, then you're going to know. I mean, for example, if I were to get something 2 hours and it says, okay, this is going to be cardiology, no, I'm not going to go down that road. It just doesn't make sense, right? And so it's not that that's a negative thing. It's actually, we're going to stop spamming you with offers of things that you don't want. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's in a nutshell. Those are probably the main ones that I would mention. We've worked really hard on it to get it to where it functions so that it can be a smooth system.
Claro. Ahora te voy a decir una frase y tú me la comentas, ¿vale? La interpretación sin calidad no merece la pena. KUDO Marketplace nos lleva a la precariedad y a una interpretación sin calidad, lo que supone el fin de la profesión.
I don't agree.
You don't agree.
It's really that simple. I don't agree. Again, KUDO Marketplace has been created for a specific market segment. And it's going to be able to, and I guess what I would do, and I know that sometimes this is frustrating because you're doing the interview, but I'm going to throw a question right back at you.
A mí, no, yo soy la entrevistadora, chaval. Va a ser que no.
But my question would be this. Okay, so it will be a rhetorical question.
Mejor. A todos los que nos ven ahora mismo.
Yeah. Does it make sense for us to turn away from new ways of meeting multilingually and say we simply don't do that? Wouldn't that lead to the death of the profession? Keep it alive in certain circles where things are going to continue as they always have, but what about the rest of the world? What really drives us at KUDO is facilitating multilingual communication so the world can tackle the problems and the challenges and the opportunities that we have. That is what we are trying to facilitate. And we're trying to do it based on the way people are doing work today. And they will do work in the future. We have to adapt. We have to adjust. And at the same time, understand clearly what our core values are and what we really care about. I know that what has happened over the last year has created a lot of fear and uncertainty among colleagues. It's huge. And I see it. I see it in my students. I see it in my colleagues that are wondering, am I going to get work? What's going to happen? How am I going to pay my mortgage? But one thing I have learned over the years is I've looked into so many different things, and I know I'm one of those people that's always pushing boundaries and poking around and trying new things. And what I have learned is that any decision that is made out of fear is not a good decision.
It's a bad decision, exactly.
And so that's why I think if any of these decisions, if people are thinking about this and they're basing their decisions on fear, we need to think, okay, let's look at what's really happening and what can we do to move forward as a profession? And what can I do as a professional to move forward and adapt to new conditions?
Barry, creo que lo he leído en la web, no sé, lo tengo apuntado, pero no sé exactamente dónde lo he sacado. En una frase sobre el marketplace que dice que the market is going to self-regulate. Eso lo he leído, pero no sé exactamente dónde. ¿Me lo podrías explicar?
The idea of self-regulation is that you reach scale. Okay. When and let me just say that time will tell if this marketplace concept is going to work. Vale. I do appreciate all of the concern that has been created because it means that they have a lot of faith in our abilities to make things happen. And thank you for that. We really appreciate it.
Sí.
But we're doing all we can to make sure that we control the variables that we can control. But the reality is we are breaking new ground and we are also learning as we go. So we'll see. We'll see how this develops. We're going to do our very best to make it a successful venture, and that means for everyone involved. And if the marketplace continues to grow, I should say, since I'm representing the company, when the marketplace grows, and I think there's a really, really good chance it's going to, and we're working really hard to make that happen. But when it reaches a certain scale, it can self-regulate because there will be enough interpreters that have worked in so many different meetings and they're going to be able to gain expertise. Think about it this way. Think about if where you get to the point where there is so much work that you can go in and just turn something on and it shows up. And you can say, yeah, I'll take that, I'll take that, I'll take that, and I'll take that. And that works for my week. I've got other things that I'm not going to worry about. All right. And all of these topics, I know I've been working with these companies now for a couple of years, and I just add that into my regular workflow. Think about that for a minute. And the system is going to be able to know who's available, in what time zones, what their preferences are in terms of topics, how do they like to work. All of those things can be taken into account. And when the market begins to self-regulate, this is where you get to that big level, right? Now we're talking like macroeconomics. That market is going to regulate itself beautifully. There are always going to be outliers and things that you have to work on, right? That we have to jump on, corner cases, as they like to call them. But we are going to be able to address those, I think, very well. And as this grows and as the volume increases, and again, don't think in terms of a zero-sum game. Don't think, oh, because this is open, that, because X is happening, Y is going to disappear. Y is probably going to continue and keep going and doing those things. There will be some replacement. It's inevitable. But largely it's going to stay. And then if Marketplace continues to grow and offer more opportunities to interpreters, then we're going to be able to actually raise the proficiency level of the overall interpreting cadre because of the amount of work that they will be doing, right? And so that's the way that it can self-regulate. Those that don't want to be in it do not join. Those that do join. Those that find that it provides value for them and it gives them the outlet to be able to live the life that they want, that's really an amazing thing.
Claro, pero tu pronóstico es de crecimiento, es decir, que las cosas van a ir bien y va a haber muchos trabajos pequeños que esos intérpretes puedan coger si quieren para rellenar huecos en su calendario. Pero también puede pasar lo contrario, es decir, que esto lleve a una precarización con una interpretación de peor calidad y que al final los delegados prefieran optar por el inglés y al final destruyamos todo el mercado. Eso también podría pasar.
It could. But because that's one of the possible outcomes, does that mean we shouldn't try?
No digo que tú te pones en el escenario positivo, pero también puede pasar justo el contrario, ¿no?
Yeah, but just trying to answer that. And again, we're learning as we go, but rest assured, it is not our intent to go and destroy the market. It's not in our interest. It's not in interpreting's interest, not in the client's interest, right? So we're building this because we think that it will be a good thing. And it will make it possible to take professional interpreting services to these clients. And this is actually a wonderful window of opportunity to do that.
Si va todo bien.
Well, I wouldn't say just if everything goes well. I would say even if things go well most of the time and we run into some problems. I don't like the all or nothing things that are
pero bueno,
coming up all the time.
Que es una posibilidad, es decir, esto puede ir a más, pero también puede ir a menos. El marketplace puede acelerar un poco un proceso de deterioro, de declive de una profesión que yo creo que está en declive, básicamente.
I mean, and I would answer and say, why is it on the downturn? Why is the profession waning, as you've put it? Let's ask ourselves, what are the reasons that is happening? And how is it that we can sincerely address it? Or have we just given in and said, oh, this is just, it's going on a downward spiral or a downward downturn.
Bueno, mira, pero muy interesante. Yo tengo que hacer esta pregunta. ¿Tú por qué crees que esta profesión está en declive? Que es algo mucho más general, mucho no tiene que ver con KUDO, sino ¿qué está pasando con la interpretación?
Well, I don't think that it is in decline.
Vale.
I think that we are seeing a tremendous opportunity for expansion and growth But what we have to understand is that growth and that expansion isn't going to be like it was in the 60s. If we're continuing to think that it's going to be like it was in the golden years of the United Nations, I think that is a wrong assumption. The work's going to be different. We have to adapt to it and understand where we can shape it to our benefit. And that's what we are trying to do. We want it to be in the benefit of interpreters because, frankly, it's in our benefit for it to be good for the interpreters.
Sí. Barry, una última pregunta para terminar, porque la verdad es que me has respondido un montón de cosas y estoy muy contenta. Es más de carácter personal. Tú y yo somos intérpretes profesionales, somos miembros de AIC, trabajamos en escuelas de formación. Digamos que tenemos una perspectiva o una trayectoria similar. ¿Qué te ha hecho a ti apostar por el proyecto de KUDO? Porque hay mucha gente que considera que tú contribuyes a acabar con la profesión. ¿Qué te ha motivado? ¿Por qué formas tu parte de este proyecto? Y ya con esto cierro y te dejo seguir con tu trabajo.
Many years back, and I've shared this story before, but I had just finished my stint as a staff interpreter for the Free Trade Area of the Americas negotiations and had relocated again to Washington and was hanging out my shingle and starting to work with my clients again. And I got a call from a friend of mine. He said, my son has to give a presentation in Mexico City, but he's going to do it from Washington, D.C. And he just likes some guidance on, language and some things like that. And I said, yeah, I'd be happy to do that. I'm a little busy. I don't know if we're going to be able to meet. He says, oh, you don't need to. We can just do it over a platform. We'll use a Microsoft platform. He'll be able to share his screen. You guys can connect by phone. And when I saw that technology in its, really embryonic state at the time, this was 2005. So we're talking 17 years ago. When I finished that call, I said, this is going to rock our world. We need to get ahead of this. And so that is where the motivation began. Now, additionally, as an interpreter trainer, I want my students to go out into a healthy market. I want them to be prepared with the tools they need to work in the market of tomorrow, not in the market of yesterday, although that's an element of the market of tomorrow. And I realized that changes need to happen, that they needed to receive different kind of training. That's what led me to create a course on remote interpreting technologies 5 years ago and start just showing them what's out there and helping them develop their own criteria to decide what they will and won't do and what's acceptable for them. Because their market is very, very different from the market that you and I started in, 20-something years ago. And so that's been a huge motivator for me. And I see in KUDO the opportunity to have a lasting, positive effect on the future of multilingual communication. And we're surrounded by people that care about that are bought in 100% to that mission. And we are working every day to make that happen. That is what motivated me to make this switch. Now is the time. And I really feel it's important for me to be able to contribute to the market so that the students of next year and 5 years and 10 years and 15 years down the road are going to have those high-level linguistic skills, but they're also going to understand how to be able to deliver them in a world that is changing radically. Now, I do not dispute that there are things to lament, that we are seeing a significant transition in our profession and the way that we deliver our services. I started over a decade ago saying that this was coming down the pike. I gave presentations, Rome, Brussels, California, at all sorts of different places talking about it. But it was always seen as, futurology. Oh, yeah, someday, maybe, yeah, it's going to happen. And then nobody saw the pandemic coming, and wham, there it was. And thankfully, platforms existed. Can you imagine what would have happened if they had not? As bumpy as it's been already, think about if none of that had existed. And so I, for one, am grateful for those people that stuck their neck out and started innovating and trying to make this work while everyone was saying, no, we don't do that. No, I'm not going to do that. No, I'm not interested in this. No, we just don't work that way. And then suddenly everybody worked that way. And then we started to see the problems and the things that we could have worked through previously had we taken a more proactive approach. And so as I've told another group of colleagues recently, their motivation is the same as mine, but how we're going about it is a little different. And I recognize that and I respect it. But I am very motivated to move forward to make this something that is a real contribution to the profession and to help multilingual communication beyond the profession, multilingual communication, so we can resolve the many thorny issues that we have as a planet and to help us get through all of this, right? We know that language is I guess I should say we know, it's my opinion. I truly believe that what makes us human is our ability to speak language and to have that abstract thought and to be able to express ideas and to debate and to reach conclusions and to create, right, and innovate. And embedded deep in that is the ability to express things clearly in one's own language. And so we need to make sure that people can do that online, ensure that it is quality. Because I can tell you, if we say we're not going to do it, they're not going to stop meeting online.
No, claro que no. Sí, sí.
So we've got to find a way to make this work. And I think it makes a lot more sense to work together than to be, pushing against each other. But I really thank you for your time. It's been just great to see you again.
Sí, hace tiempo,
Hopefully sometime you'll be here in the States or I'll be in Europe.
A ver si pronto se puede uno mover. Barry, muchísimas gracias por esta entrevista. Gracias por todo tu tiempo, por las buenas explicaciones. Creo que se pueden disipar muchas dudas de esta manera. Y bueno, te deseo mucha suerte y a seguir trabajando y que pase pronto esta pandemia y como dices tú, nos podamos ver pronto, ¿vale? Cuídate mucho.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you and completely agree. It's been a wonderful chance just to chat with you and I do hope that it helps put a lot of worries and concerns to rest.
Muy bien, muchas gracias, ¿eh?
All right, bye-bye.